So I really love talking to today's guest, Heidi Beatty, who is the CEO of Crown Abbey, which is really a product development and project management firm, because she really does do exactly what we wanted this podcast to do. Is she's about the intersection of consumer needs, unanswered questions, unmet concerns, and how you build a business around that. So I find that particularly fascinating. She could sort of be, on our brochure for what we're talking about when we talk about that intersection.
Well, what I really love about her and her company, Crown Abbey, is that they really address so many different fields, whether it's devices or supplements or products, all having to do with women's health. So super exciting. But since she is the Queen of Wipes, which is a title that I've never heard anybody else hold, I just can't wait to really speak to her.
Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so excited to have our guest today, Heidi Beatty, who's the CEO of Crown Abbey, which is an amazing company that she's built from scratch to really be a meaningful player in the world of women's sexual and reproductive health. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for your English accent with my last name. I really appreciate that.
I practiced. And we actually, Heidi is the reason that Alyssa and I believe, know one another. We were on a panel together many years ago at a conference and hit it off and made lifelong relationships. So thank you for that. Tell us a little bit about what Crown Abbey is, what it does, and really what was the inspiration for it, because it was a departure when you created this.
Yes, it really was. So Crown Abbey is a consultancy, and it is a little hard to explain to people in like 2 sentences. But we are R&D experts that bring project management as well. So really what we're doing is helping people develop and launch their products. But we're all about people. So we think about people, we think about the users. So it's a real mix of experiences and what we offer as Crown Abbey.
And are you actually building the project? Where the product and the project? Where do you come in? When would someone call you ideally and say, I need you right now?
Yeah, that happens at any time, but ideally right at the beginning of the project. And what we do then is to really help all the way from concept to think things through, put together a brief, and then help understand what that product could or should look like, and then help build the product from there. And really, and I'm going to kind of keep going back to it, it's really all about the users for us. It's all about the people. So most of the products we work on are for women, because that just happens to be the categories that we mostly work on. We do also have projects for men as well, which is actually super interesting for us to then think about men too. But what we do then is really think about who is going to be using this product. What is this product for? Then we go away and start thinking about what kind of technologies exist that could fit that brief. But then we come back again and think about the consumer and how that would impact the user. If we pick this technology, how would it impact the user?
Can you walk us?
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, can you walk us through how you got interested in women's health and your background? Because I know you really started at J&J, which of course probably started with, your women's health background.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So I had no idea really when I studied chemistry at university where I would end up, and I definitely did not predict I would be here. So I started my career at J&J, as you said, and I spent nearly 10 years with them, always in R&D. So it's really about that product. But I was very, very lucky that I joined J&J back in the day when we ran our projects from beginning to end as R&D. So now in big corporations, the projects are split out depending whether it's upstream or, the concept phase or the post-launch phase. So I got to run the project all the way through and see it from every angle and run a lot of projects. That's the other advantage. So I started actually at the bench as a formulator, making mostly surfactant products, so shampoos and baby bath, which was super fun. And then I moved over to Carefree and worked on panty liners.
Yeah.
And so that's a really, really different way of thinking about a product, because when you put something in a bottle, it's not easy, but it's a lot easier than when you try and make a panty liner or a pad, because there are many different layers. The engineering that goes in, that's involved, the technologies between each of those layers is very, very complicated and tricky. So that was a real eye-opener and such a great learning ground. And then from there, I kind of put the two together, the formulation and that woven experience, and then worked in wipes with J&J.
So we were destined to meet because I worked on their menstrual product business for 10 years as an outside strategist. So give us, for instance, Alyssa sees patients with all kinds of concerns and questions, and I see businesses coming up with solutions. How do you decide, which problems you want to focus on, which are the highest need? And give us an example, if you could, to the extent that it's not proprietary, of a kind of project you would walk through and the problem you're solving. Because there are tons of problems in women's health. You could be working 24/7, in the lab creating solutions, because we have so many areas where we can improve.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's say, and this is completely, because obviously I can't share anything that we have actually worked on, but let's say someone comes to us and they are a diagnostic company. So they want to use a tampon or a pad, which we now see, which is so exciting. We now see coming onto the marketplace and being invested into, but they don't know how to build the pad or how to build that tampon to get the most out of it. And so what we can do then is walk through with them and help them find the right technology. And that is really, I just looked up how long Crown Abbey's been existed. It's nearly 9 years. It's unbelievable. So with all that experience, we have such a wide array of vendors and network of people that we know, so we can go through that and pick out what could be the best fit. And it doesn't have to be something that's been used before, but then we're thinking about not just that, how the layers come together or how the machine will run it, but we're also thinking about, of course, how the consumer is going to be impacted, what packaging, what regulatory framework that's going to be in, what claims we want to make. So we're really generalist like that. We think about the whole project as we move through it.
Yeah. Heidi, I am fascinated because you and I actually originally met in the maternity type supplement world. And then we again re-met again as I was a client of yours, and happily in a different realm. I'm most interested in hearing about the wipes scenario, because this has really literally become almost kryptonite in the gynecologic world, where we see an enormous desire on the consumer end for wanting to use wipes for all kinds of things, yet a big backlash from practitioners who feel that they are super evil and going to damage intimate skin and cause all kinds of sensitivity. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so those are the kind of things that really get me excited.
Me too.
that friction, and how do we meet and compromise, and it's two things, right? It's first understanding the user, of course. I'm going to say three things now. Then it's around the technology, but then it's around communication. So it's communication back with the users, with the brand, the client, but then also the people who are going to be using the product. So I think putting together and education around your product is really, really important. So as you know, I am a little bit of a wipes queen. So we do a lot of wipes project. I've worked in wipes for many, many years. And I've seen the data, and for me, it's all about being data driven. So if we developed together a wipe from scratch, then we would be selecting raw materials that both fit the needs of the user in terms of safety and toxicology and all of those, particularly in the intimate area. But then we'd also be looking at what claims we want to make on the product, whatever that might be. But the one thing I just came away from a conference in Paris, which is all on the cosmetic side, and just seeing more and more and more about the microbiome. And I am so excited about the microbiome. And now we can test our products against the microbiome, and we can do it specifically on the vaginal microbiome, as well as other parts of the body. But so then we can really prove to ourselves and to the consumers and to the OBGYNs and to whoever wants and needs to know. And so we do it through data. We don't do it through, I used it myself and it's great, which is that's a legitimate story, but behind that story, you need a lot of data.
So here's today's hot flash. The women's intimate care wipes market is tremendous, valued at $5.6 billion in 2023 and on an increasing trajectory from here. So I'm curious because the microbiome is different inside the vagina than on the external vulvar skin. So I assume you test for both. But they are so volatile and change with all kinds of disruptors, minute to minute, day to day, month to month. So how do you account for that in your testing? And I specifically want to speak about fragrance because that's really the offensive ingredient for most gynecologists.
Yeah, and look, so this is where I become the generalist. So I'm not an expert in the microbiome. I'm not an expert in fragrance, but I'm a generalist when it comes to the product itself. So what I would say is those are the criteria then we need to hit in the brief, right? And yes, so this is what fascinates me because this is really, really new news that how the microbiome behaves and changes during the cycle, and through menopause and. So I think it's really about using the latest understanding, the latest data that we have, and then building the product around that. And we've been doing that for decades, but you wouldn't go back and say, let's pull that product we launched 20 years ago and launch it now, right? Because there are so many things that we understand differently. And that's the beauty of the science, right? That always leads us to taking strides forwards. But it doesn't mean that we don't have new problems that with that, that new launch or that new category. So we have to be continually thinking about it and not just sit back and go, okay, we're done.
So you just touched on so many different issues that I want to focus on. You talk a lot, and I also come from the world of listening to I'll say the user. Sometimes it's the consumer, but in this other times it's physicians. In the space that you're in, when you're delving into product development, are you having conversations with physicians as well? And I want to add to that question, in the void left by, our substandard sex education and short appointment times driven by the system, the education has sort of fallen. It's become the wild, wild west, and consumers are getting their information from influencers who may or may not have any medical information or even understand what Alyssa just said about the external vulvar skin. So where in the process do you get the voice of the HCP, the healthcare practitioner, to ensure that the science reflects what their latest knowledge is as well?
Exactly. So it's bringing together a lot of different things. So I think, so to answer your question, it depends on the project. So if it's a product that, is going to have an OBGYN or a different type of HCP input, then absolutely we go talk to them and to you both. You are definitely the type of people that I would be talking to and listening to and watching and finding out as much as I can. to bring that as an input into the project. But of course, we can also test with OBGYNs, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a product, we can run, they're not clinical in the sense of a drug product, but we can run healthcare professional-led investigations. And so that is really, really important to start building more and more data. So it's bringing data from lots of different places. And I think to answer your question about influencers, we get a lot of people, calling us, which I love, I absolutely love, and asking and say, hey, I've had this great idea. How do I turn this into a product? And that isn't always straightforward, right? It's, as we all know, particularly when you come from big corporate, we have hundreds of ideas and only one might make it to the market. So it's very much flipped when we're talking with entrepreneurs and influencers, because typically they will come with one idea that then expands out to a pipeline or to a roadmap later on. So again, it's all about communication, right? It's about educating everyone we meet at every level, whether it's at, the post office and you're standing next to someone who's, looking at products. I was just on a girls' weekend away and ended up talking more about vaginal discharge than I had imagined I would, because it's certainly not my area of expertise. But, we are all women at the same age going through the same stuff. So we all share information all the way through to, then looking at literature, reading patents, and then running actual studies on products. So the data comes from a lot of different areas.
Yeah, I feel like that is my day-to-day conversation all day, every day. So I totally get it. My question is, do you only rely now on data from HCPs, or are you also doing user experience trials for the consumer and kind of using both bits of information?
Yeah. So what is super, super exciting, because we work both with big corporate companies as well as small entrepreneurs. And there are now so many ways that we can get that voice of consumer. So many ways. It's so exciting, because there's a lot of data that is online already, right? So we can already start, mining data through that. But yes, we insist. I mean, you have to test the product before you go to market.
Yeah.
For many different reasons, right? So from a product perspective, you want to make sure it does its job and is, and is meeting expectations. But then you also want to hear what the users feel themselves, how they experience the product, what they like, what they don't like. And because that's always iterative, we never stop, right? We're always thinking about what the next thing could look like. So yeah, that's always on our minds.
I'm curious because there are some issues in GYN that I'm not seeing great solutions to yet. And I'm curious because I know you're very involved with the non-wovens industry, and I would love you to define that. But my big question regarding that is fabrics that women are using, whether it's for their panties, menstrual panties, any intimate garment choices, because there are so many now, and I really see a big push towards non-synthetic garment materials, and again with having chemicals and forever chemicals specifically in mind to avoid. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, and I think maybe to answer that backwards, to think about the forever chemicals, that again is something that, a few years ago we didn't even know, right? We hadn't even heard of. And, we didn't go into the lab and think, oh, right, I need some cotton, I need some paper, and I need to add a few drops of pee. And, we don't add it, we don't think about it. It's not an ingredient. But it has been found in the product. And so all this does is make us better and more, we go back through the supply chain, because it's not added at the product stage, it's added way before. So then you have to dig through your supply chain and get stronger partnerships with your vendors, more transparency, and then they have to start testing for that. But, again, I'm going to come back to sort of the science and the data, because PFAS is an umbrella term that covers a lot of different things. Some are okay, some are less okay, and that may change moving forward, because that's the nature of raw materials and ingredients and carryover ingredients. So yes, I think that again, communicating, educating what we understand about PFAS and how they are in our products and how they're going to impact is very, very important. And we are learning and getting better every day.
Can you just describe for people who don't know what PFAS is?
Yeah, they're just a bunch of chemicals that hang around for a very long time. So they're called these forever chemicals because they don't break down in the environment. And so they've been found in a lot of different places.
Which historically wasn't a problem. I mean, our consciousness about it is different.
Yeah.
I want to just make note that, these are ubiquitous in our environment. They are not just in our products that we're using, but, also found in certain water supplies. And, they generally tend to make products more waterproof or slippery or things of that nature. So just as a background.
And the tough thing with that is because once you start digging into it, you have to get, and I'm just going to go super geeky just for a second, you have to get into the analytical techniques, how are you actually looking? So it's easier to understand what you've added in, but to try and find what is in your product or in your urine or in your breast milk, or then you have to use the right analytical technique. And, there's a lot of debate about what that right analytical technique is. So it worries me that there are these scary headlines that are scaring people. I think what is more important is to understand, how we can identify them, which ones we should be removing and how we remove them, so that it's then good for everybody, not just the brand and the product and that user, but for everyone who might interact with these products.
So as you were describing, different ingredients go in and out of vogue and the conversation changes, some driven by the broad medical community, some driven by consumers. I'm curious, really for Alyssa, you referred early on, Heidi, and we've seen these products, devices that were used for one thing, let's say capturing menstrual fluid, are now being used to gather information, which is diagnostic in nature. So I'm curious, as a practitioner, how has this changed your conversations with your patients when they bring in not just Dr. Google, but, here's 17 hours of data from my fill in the blank, from my ring, from my pad, from my anything?
Look, any data is going to be helpful. I know there's information perhaps coming forward about gathering cancer screening information from menstrual blood, or can we diagnose endometriosis by looking at menstrual blood? So these things are all going to evolve over time in terms of data, but are not really ready for prime time when it comes to clinical practice just yet.
And is the availability of data, which might not be totally cooked, does that increase the anxiety that patients bring information into your office with?
I think it depends on personality. So some patients are going to be super anxious and are up all night with Dr. Google. And thankfully, they're querying Dr. Google at 2 a.m. and not Dr. Dweck, but that's okay. But, we shall see. I mean, it just takes an idea to really bring this type of data forward. I was curious, Heidi, and I will leave this as our lasting thought for you to contemplate. It's amazing to speak with you across the pond, as they say. Are you seeing different trends in women's health in the UK compared to the US? And if so, in what fields?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there are differences, but it's not as stark as you would probably maybe think or expect. With all this information, one of the things, because we share a language, right, it's very, very easy. Anything that hits the UK headlines is going to be searchable, and everybody will find it in the US. And the reason I say that is because it's the same for every country, but if it has to go through a Google Translate or whatever, other translation systems apply.
And there's different regulatory systems, there's different healthcare systems.
Exactly. So it's different from a regulatory perspective. The thing that fascinates me personally is that in the UK, so when we're talking about menopause, we've done a lot of work on menopause. And then I am now menopausal. So it's been fascinating to watch that journey from a US perspective, how I know I would have been discussing it with my OBGYN, to coming to the UK where you don't have access to a gynecologist for sure, but you don't have those regular check-ins like you would in the US. It's not a standard practice.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because from my perspective, the UK healthcare system has always been several steps ahead of the US, but I think that's a conversation for another day.
But what I was going to say, just to finish that thought,
Yeah.
what I was going to say is that in the UK is very much further advanced on hormone replacement therapy,
Yes.
HRT. And so it's very, very standard here. So I think that plays a huge part when you're developing product, because it's going to impact your microbiome.
Yeah.
It's going to impact how you're feeling. It's going to impact the products and solutions you need if you're on HRT versus if you're not on HRT. So I think that is where we think about consumer and user all the time.
So speaking of consumers and entrepreneurs and healthcare practitioners, where can people find you, whether they're in the early stages of an idea, they've developed and they have some user input? How can they find you and figure out if Crown Abbey is the right solution at this time?
Yeah, thank you. So we have a website, very simple, crownabbey.com. So that's the easiest way to find me, or look me up on LinkedIn, or any of my team members. And we are very excited, and we're always willing to talk things through, and just chat. And I'm always loving meeting new people. So that for me is really, really a wonderful experience.
And I will say from personal experience, it is wonderful to work with you and your team. You guys are spot on. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.